You don't even know who they are, do you? Lily whispered to herself as she stared at the photo on the wall. The kids in the picture looked exactly like Dominic. Her heart raced. She had been working in the Romano mansion for months, keeping her head down, doing her job, never questioning anything. But that photo, it changed everything. She had noticed the similarities before, the same sharp jawline, the same deep eyes. But now, seeing it on the wall, she couldn't deny the truth any longer. The kids in the picture were his children. Lily's hands trembled as she adjusted the tray of drinks in her hands. She had to confront him. There was no turning back. She knew what the consequences could be. Dominic Romano was not just any man. He was the Mafia boss, a powerful and dangerous man. His world was filled with secrets, and he made sure no one crossed him. Yet, here she was, standing in his mansion, ready to speak the truth. As she made her way down the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. The security cameras were always on, but this felt different. She reached the door to his office and hesitated for a moment. This was it. If she walked through that door, everything would change. She knocked softly. "Come in," his voice echoed from inside. Lily stepped into the room, her heart pounding. She placed the tray down on the desk, avoiding his gaze. He didn't look up, but she could feel his presence, cold and commanding. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come out. She was choking on fear. But then, she remembered why she was there. She had to speak. "Sir, those kids, they look just like you," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's pen stopped midair. He looked up at her, his dark eyes narrowing. His jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Lily's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Those kids in the picture," Lily said, her voice steady now. "They look exactly like you." Dominic stood up, towering over her. His face went pale, and for the first time, Lily saw a flicker of something unfamiliar in his eyes, something like fear. "What do you know?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. "I know. They're your children, Dominic," Lily said, her heart racing. "You've been hiding them. Those kids are yours." Dominic took a step forward, his eyes searching hers, and for a moment, the room felt frozen. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared at her, as if processing what she had said. Lily stood there, waiting, her mind spinning. She had just said the one thing she should never have said, but she couldn't take it back. The truth was out now, and there was no telling what Dominic would do next. Dominic took a step back, his face turning pale as Lily stood frozen, waiting for his response. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. For years, he had carefully kept the truth hidden. But now, this maid, this woman who had barely said 2 words to him in the months she worked here, had just uncovered the secret he had buried so deep. "What do you know about them?" Dominic asked again, his voice now softer, but no less dangerous. Lily's throat went dry. She had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. "I know," she said, her voice shaking. "Those kids, they're yours. The ones you've been hiding from everyone." Dominic stared at her, his mind racing. He had always kept his private life private, especially after the death of his wife. The children, he hadn't wanted anyone to know. They weren't supposed to be part of his world, not with the empire he had built, not with the danger that came with his name. But Lily had seen them. She had recognized them. And now, she knew the truth. His heart hammered in his chest. He had thought no one would notice, that the children would stay hidden, safe in the shadows of his life. But this maid, of all people, had found out. "You've been watching them?" Dominic asked, his voice laced with a new edge. Lily shook her head quickly. "No, I wasn't watching them. I just saw the picture. In the hallway." She stepped back, her heart racing as she realized how close she was to making everything worse. "You saw the picture?" Dominic repeated, his eyes narrowing. "What picture?" "The one of you with the kids," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The one in the frame on the wall. They look just like you, Dominic." I couldn't help but notice. For a moment, there was silence. Dominic's expression softened, just for a split second, as if he was fighting an internal battle. He turned away from her, running a hand through his hair as he paced across the room. Lily could see the tension in his shoulders, the struggle he was clearly facing. She wasn't sure if he was angry with her, or just confused. She had never seen him like this before. "I should have known," he muttered under his breath. "Should have known this would come out eventually." He turned back to face her, his eyes dark with something else now, something like regret. I didn't want them to be a part of this life. I didn't want them to be part of my world, he said, his voice rough. But you're right. They are mine. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She had expected anger, maybe even a threat, but not this. Not this quiet admission of guilt. What happens now? She asked, her voice trembling. Dominic walked towards her, his eyes locked onto hers. What happens now is up to you, he said softly. You've uncovered a truth that could ruin everything, and I have no idea what to do with it. Lily stood there, frozen, unsure of how to respond. She had no idea what she had just started, but something told her that whatever came next, it would change everything. Dominic stared at her for a moment longer, then turned away again. You've already seen too much, he said, his voice distant. But maybe, just maybe, I can trust you with this secret. Lily didn't know what to say. She had no idea how to process this new reality. She had walked into this mansion as a simple maid, doing her job, keeping her head down. But now, everything had changed. Dominic stood still, his back turned to Lily as he stared out the window. The weight of her words hung heavy in the room. She had come here to do her job, to remain invisible, just like every other day. But now, she had seen too much. And somehow, the quiet understanding that had passed between them in that moment felt more like a bond than a threat. He let out a breath, trying to clear his mind, but it was no use. The truth was out, and now there was no hiding from it. Lily, the woman he had kept at arm's length, had discovered a part of him that even he had tried to forget. He had kept his children hidden, locked away from the world, from his empire. They were innocent, and he wanted to keep them that way. But Lily had seen them, had recognized them. The illusion was shattered. Slowly, he turned back to face her, his eyes now calm but piercing. I don't know what to do with this, he said, his voice steady but soft. But I can't erase it. And neither can you. Lily swallowed hard, her heart racing. This was the moment she had feared, the one where everything would change, and she'd be forced to make a choice. But the choice was already made for her. The weight of his words was too much to ignore. She had already crossed the line. She had already seen too much. I'm not going to tell anyone, she said, her voice barely audible, but with a resolve that surprised her. Dominic looked at her, as if trying to gauge whether she was telling the truth. You better not, he warned, his eyes narrowing. Because if you do, it won't just be your job on the line. Lily's pulse quickened. She knew the power he held, the control he had over everything. Her heart raced, but she stood her ground. I'm not the type to spread rumors, she said, her voice growing stronger with every word. You don't have to worry about me. Dominic studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I'm not worried about you, he said quietly. I'm worried about what happens next. Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. She had already stepped into a world far darker than she could have imagined. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. She had seen something in Dominic's eyes that day, something more than the cold, ruthless man he appeared to be. And maybe, just maybe, she could make a difference. But as the silence between them stretched on, she knew that everything had changed. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was part of a secret she never asked for, but now had to keep. She wasn't sure how she would navigate this new reality, but one thing was certain, she couldn't walk away from it. Dominic turned back to the window, his shoulders tense as he watched the city below. You're not leaving, are you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily hesitated before answering. No, she said softly. I'm not leaving. She wasn't sure why she said it, but the words felt true. Something inside her told her that this was only the beginning. That whatever happened next, she would face it head on. Days passed, and life in the Romano mansion continued as usual, but the tension between Dominic and Lily never fully dissipated. She still worked in the house, still kept her head down, but the unspoken truth hung between them like a fragile thread. Dominic had said nothing more about the children, nothing about the secret they now shared. It was as if he had buried it back in the deep, hidden corners of his mind, where he kept everything else that was too dangerous to face. But Lily knew better. The silence spoke volumes. It was late one evening when she found herself standing in front of Dominic's office once again. She hadn't expected to be here, hadn't planned on seeking him out, but something in her had shifted. The weight of the secret had become unbearable, and she needed answers. She knocked softly, almost hesitantly. "Come in," came his familiar, controlled voice. She stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. Dominic was standing by the window, looking out over the city, as always. His back was to her, but he didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. The room was quiet, save for the sound of the rain tapping gently against the window. "You wanted to see me?" Lily asked, her voice steady but unsure. Dominic didn't answer right away. He seemed lost in thought, his shoulders tense, his gaze fixed on the rain-soaked streets below. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "I never wanted them to be a part of this life. But here we are." He turned to face her, his eyes unreadable. "You've seen the picture. You know what that means." Lily swallowed, trying to steady herself. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's gaze softened for a brief moment, but it was quickly replaced with the same cold intensity that had defined him since the day she met him. "What happens now is we move forward. You stay here, and I continue running my empire. But this secret doesn't leave this room." He stepped closer, his presence looming over her. "You understand, don't you?" Lily nodded, her throat tight. "I understand," she said quietly, though her mind was racing. How had she ended up in this situation? A maid, a simple woman with no connections, no power. Yet here she was, in the heart of a Mafia boss's world, holding the key to his most guarded secret. "Good," Dominic said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Because if you were to tell anyone..." He let the sentence hang in the air, the threat unspoken but clear. "I won't. I promised," Lily replied, more firmly than she felt. She had no intention of betraying Dominic, but she couldn't ignore the fact that she had become part of a world she wasn't prepared for. A world that could destroy her just as easily as it had built Dominic's empire. "And what about you?" Lily asked, surprising herself with the question. Dominic raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard. "What do you mean? What happens to you now?" she asked, her voice soft, yet laced with a hint of curiosity. Dominic's eyes darkened for a moment, as if the question had struck a nerve. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned away, his gaze once again fixed on the rain outside. "I keep going," he said finally, his voice distant. "I always keep going." But Lily could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the same uncertainty she had seen in him when she first spoke the truth about his children. And for the first time since she had entered the room, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was more to Dominic Romano than the cold, ruthless man he portrayed to the world. The days that followed were nothing like the ones before. Lily continued with her duties, her movements mechanical, as though she was on autopilot. She kept her distance from Dominic, never truly meeting his gaze, as though the invisible thread that connected them had somehow been pulled too tight, leaving both of them uncertain of where they stood. Yet, despite the distance, there was a quiet tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that things had changed between them. Dominic remained the same, his presence commanding, his demeanor cold, but there were moments, small moments, where Lily caught a glimpse of something else in his eyes, something deeper, something that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. It was late one evening when she found herself standing outside his office door again. She hadn't planned to seek him out, but somehow, her feet had led her here. She stood there for a moment, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, or what she even wanted to say, but she knew that silence between them could no longer stretch any longer. She knocked softly, not waiting for a response before stepping inside. Dominic was seated at his desk, papers spread out in front of him, but his eyes lifted to meet hers the moment she entered. For a second, they just stared at each other. Then, as if breaking free from the moment, Dominic motioned for her to come in. "I didn't expect you," he said, his voice low but not unwelcoming. "I thought you might have something else to say." Lily took a step forward, her breath catching in her chest. The tension was palpable, but it wasn't the fear that had gripped her before. It was something else, something she couldn't quite name. She opened her mouth, but for a moment, the words didn't come. She wasn't sure what had brought her here, but she knew she needed to say something, anything to clear the air. "I wanted to ask," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens now? Between us, I mean." Dominic studied her for a long moment, his gaze steady, almost unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest, as if weighing her question. "Now," he repeated softly. Nothing changes, Lily. Nothing should change. His eyes darkened slightly as he spoke. You're still here to do your job, just like before. And I'm still here, running my empire. There was a heaviness in his voice, something that spoke of years of hardening, of burying things that should have been faced. Lily nodded, though a part of her wasn't satisfied with his answer. But what about the secret? She asked quietly. What happens with that? Dominic's jaw tightened, and for a second, the cold mask slipped. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. You don't understand, he said, his voice tight. This world I live in, it doesn't allow for mistakes, for weaknesses. He let out a long sigh. But now I've made one, and it's too late to undo it. Lily took a deep breath, trying to make sense of the man in front of her. The man who seemed so unbreakable, yet, in his eyes, she saw cracks. He was only human, after all. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice softer now. Dominic stood and walked to the window, his back to her. What else can I do? He said, almost to himself. I keep moving forward. I keep running the business. I keep pretending. His shoulders slumped slightly, as though the weight of his own words had finally caught up with him. Lily watched him, the strong, powerful Mafia boss who had everything under control, yet in this moment, seemed more lost than she had ever seen him. And you? He asked, his voice quieter now, almost like a challenge. Lily felt the pull of his question deep in her chest. She had already crossed the line, already seen too much. But in that moment, standing there in his office, looking at this man who seemed so untouchable, something shifted inside her. I'm not going anywhere, she said, more firmly than she expected. I don't know why, but I'm staying. Dominic turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face, as though trying to understand her, to find out what made her different from all the others. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Dominic nodded, his face unreadable once again. Then we have an understanding, he said. This secret stays between us, and we move forward. Lily didn't know what that meant. She didn't know what came next, but she knew she couldn't walk away from it. Not now. The days that followed were filled with an unspoken tension. Dominic and Lily moved through the mansion as though nothing had changed, but everything had. The secret they shared loomed between them, unacknowledged but undeniable. Dominic continued with his business, always at the helm of his empire, while Lily carried out her duties, her mind often drifting back to that moment when everything had shifted. She would catch him watching her from across the room, his gaze unreadable, as though he was trying to figure out what she was thinking. It was almost as if he was waiting for something, some sign, some indication that she might be different from the others who had come and gone in his life. One evening, as Lily was cleaning the grand hallway, she found herself standing in front of the photo again. The picture of Dominic with the children, the one she had seen on the wall that day. It felt like a lifetime ago. But now, it was a reminder of the truth they both knew but hadn't yet spoken aloud. She stood there for a long moment, lost in her thoughts, before she felt a presence behind her. It was Dominic. She didn't have to turn around to know it was him. The weight of his gaze on her back was enough. You're thinking about it, aren't you? He asked, his voice low, almost gentle. Lily turned slowly, meeting his eyes. I'm just wondering, she said, her voice quiet, why you've kept them a secret. Dominic didn't respond right away. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. It was as though he was measuring the words, choosing his next move carefully. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than usual. Because they have nothing to do with this life, he said, gesturing vaguely to the mansion around them. They don't belong here. They deserve more than the world I've built. Lily nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the part of him that wanted to protect them from the darkness he had created. But there was something else, too. A vulnerability she had never expected to see in him. But they're yours, Lily said quietly. Dominic looked away, his jaw tightening. They are, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And that's why I can't let them get caught up in this. There was a long silence between them. Lily could feel the tension rising, the weight of his secret pressing down on them both. She wanted to reach out, to say something that would ease his pain, but she didn't know how. Finally, Dominic spoke again, his voice hardening. I'm not asking for your sympathy, he said, his eyes narrowing. I don't need anyone's pity. I'm just telling you the truth. Lily took a step forward, her heart pounding. I'm not pitying you, she said softly. I understand. More than you think. Dominic looked at her, his gaze piercing. For a moment, there was something in his eyes that softened, just slightly. It was brief, like a fleeting moment of vulnerability before he quickly shut it down again. You don't know the half of it, he said, turning away from her. But I'll make sure you never have to. With that, he walked away, leaving Lily standing there, more uncertain than ever. She didn't know what had just happened between them, but something had changed. She felt it in the air, in the way Dominic had looked at her, like he had let her in, just for a moment. And though he was walking away, she knew that the distance between them was smaller now, even if only by a fraction. She didn't know where this would lead, or if she was truly ready for what came next, but one thing was clear. She wasn't walking away. She was in this, whether she liked it or not. The next few weeks were a blur of routine, but the weight of the unspoken truth between Lily and Dominic seemed to hang over everything. She continued with her duties, her mind constantly drifting back to that conversation, to the way Dominic had looked at her when he admitted the truth about his children. She hadn't expected to hear him speak so openly, so vulnerably. He had always been so guarded, so untouchable. And now, Lily found herself standing at the edge of something she wasn't sure she was ready for. One evening, as she was finishing up her work in the kitchen, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, startled, and found herself face to face with Dominic. He looked as composed as ever, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice steady, but there was a hint of something else there, something almost uncertain. Lily nodded, though her heart was suddenly racing. She followed him down the long corridor, her thoughts spinning. They reached the private study, and Dominic opened the door for her, gesturing for her to enter. She stepped inside, unsure of what this conversation would bring. Dominic closed the door behind them, his usual confident demeanor slipping for just a moment. He leaned against the desk, his arms folded across his chest. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice quiet. "About everything. About the kids, about what you said, and about us." Lily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to bring this up again. "What about us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's gaze flickered to hers, and for a moment, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. It was raw, vulnerable, and it made her heart ache. "I don't know what you think of me, Lily," he said, his voice softer now, almost uncertain. "But I'm not used to letting anyone in. I'm not used to sharing things like this." Lily took a step forward, her pulse quickening. "I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable," she said, her voice gentle. I didn't want you to feel like you were alone in this. Like you had to carry it all on your own." Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly he nodded. "I'm not used to being open," he said. "But I appreciate you not treating me like I'm some untouchable boss. I didn't realize how much I needed that." Lily was taken aback by his honesty. She had always seen him as someone who didn't need anyone, someone who had it all together. But in that moment, she realized how wrong she had been. Dominic was just as human as anyone else, struggling with his own fears, his own doubts. "You don't have to do everything alone," she said softly, stepping closer. "You have people who care about you, people who want to help." Dominic's eyes softened for a moment, and he let out a long breath. "I know," he said quietly. "I've just never let anyone get close enough to actually help. I've always kept people at a distance." Lily could feel the tension between them easing, the walls he had built around himself beginning to crack. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but in that moment, she felt a shift she couldn't explain, but one that felt like the beginning of something new. "I'm here," she said simply. "I'm not going anywhere." Dominic looked at her, his gaze lingering. For a moment, there was a silence between them, a quiet understanding that passed between them without words. And for the first time, Lily wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something more than just a secret they shared. Something deeper. Something that could change both of their lives forever. The next few days felt different. A quiet change had settled over the mansion, an unspoken shift that neither Dominic nor Lily acknowledged, but both felt. The weight of their conversation in the study lingered, hanging in the air, a silent bond that neither could ignore. Lily found herself thinking about Dominic more than she ever thought possible. She had always seen him as the powerful, untouchable Mafia boss, a man who had built an empire on control and fear. But now, she saw him in a different light. He wasn't just the cold, calculating leader of a criminal world. He was a man who had been carrying the burden of his own secrets, his own vulnerabilities. And for the first time, Lily saw that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as invincible as he seemed. Dominic, too, seemed to be more aware of her presence. His gaze would linger on her when she wasn't looking, his attention sharper when she spoke. It was as though something between them had shifted, a quiet acknowledgement that the distance between them had closed. Yet, neither of them dared to acknowledge it directly. One evening, after another long day of work, Lily found herself in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She didn't expect anyone to come in, but as she turned to grab something from the cupboard, she found Dominic standing in the doorway. "You're still here," he said, his voice softer than usual. It wasn't a question, but more of an observation. Lily looked up, surprised. "I always stay late," she replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It's the only time I get peace." Dominic nodded, his eyes scanning the room before settling back on her. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice a little more hesitant than usual, "about everything we talked about, and about how things have been since." Lily met his gaze, unsure of where this was going. "And," she prompted, her heart pounding in her chest. Dominic took a step closer, his usual confident posture softened. "I don't know what I'm doing, Lily," he admitted, his voice low. "I've spent so many years building this life, this empire, and I've done everything to keep it separate from everything else. But with you, it's different." Lily felt her breath catch in her throat. She wasn't sure how to respond. This was the last thing she expected him to say. "I don't want to keep pushing people away," he continued, his eyes focused on her. "But I don't know how to do this. How to let someone in. How to make this, whatever this is between us, work." Lily's heart was racing now. She never imagined hearing Dominic speak like this. This man, who had been so closed off, was now standing in front of her, revealing a side of himself she never thought she would see. "I'm not asking you to fix me," he added quickly, as if anticipating her response. "But I need to know if you're willing to try, if you're willing to stay." There it was again, the unspoken question that hung between them. She had already crossed a line, already stepped into his world in ways she hadn't planned. But in this moment, standing before him, she realized something. She wasn't afraid. For the first time, she felt as though she had a choice. She could walk away, go back to the life she knew. Or she could stay and see where this strange connection between them might lead. "I'm here," she said softly, her voice steady, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I'm not going anywhere, Dominic. I never have been." Dominic's expression softened, and for a moment, he almost seemed relieved. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't deserve this," he said quietly, "but I'm glad you're here." Lily met his eyes, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite place. She didn't know where this would go, what would come next. But in this moment, standing together in the quiet kitchen, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days following their conversation were quieter, more comfortable in a way neither of them had expected. Dominic and Lily both settled into an unspoken understanding, a new rhythm that felt different but right. They didn't talk about what had been said in the kitchen, but something had changed between them. For the first time, Dominic allowed himself to be less guarded around her. He would catch her gaze across the room, and there was no longer that usual cold distance in his eyes. Instead, there was something warmer, something more human, and Lily found herself drawn to it in ways she hadn't anticipated. She couldn't deny the bond that was slowly forming between them, one that had started with shared secrets but was now growing into something more. It wasn't easy, not by any means. There were moments when the weight of his world pressed heavily on both of them, when the fear of what might happen next threatened to overwhelm everything they had started. But in those moments, they also found a quiet strength in each other. It was early one evening when Dominic asked her to join him for dinner, just the two of them, away from the eyes of the staff. It was something rare, something they both knew had a different kind of significance. Dinner was simple, a quiet affair in his private dining room. The usual grandeur of the mansion's rooms was softened by the intimacy of the moment. Dominic, usually so controlled, seemed relaxed, as though he had let his guard down completely. He watched Lily as she spoke, his expression thoughtful, and for the first time, She felt like he was truly listening to her, not just as his maid, but as an equal. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room, the conversation flowing easily now. There was no longer that tension, no more awkward silences. They spoke about everything and nothing, his childhood, her dreams, the things they hadn't shared before. You know, Dominic said, his voice quieter now, I've spent my entire life thinking I had to do everything alone. That if I let anyone in, I'd be weak. But you, he paused, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, she could see the vulnerability there. You make me feel like maybe it's okay to not be so alone. Lily's heart swelled at his words. She had never imagined this, never thought she would be the one to bring down the walls around him. She had always seen him as untouchable, unreachable, but now she understood that there was so much more to him than the cold, calculating Mafia boss everyone feared. He was someone who had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, alone, for far too long. And now, she was here, offering him something he hadn't asked for but desperately needed, connection. She didn't know where this would go, didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a maid in this mansion. She was something more to Dominic. And in that moment, she realized that whatever they were building together was worth the risk, worth whatever challenges might come their way. She smiled softly, meeting his gaze. You're not alone anymore, she said, her voice steady. You never have to be. Dominic didn't say anything at first, but the look in his eyes told her everything. It was gratitude. It was understanding. And for the first time, it was hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something together. Something real. No more secrets. No more distance. Just two people, figuring out how to navigate this strange new world they had found themselves in. And as the evening drew to a close, they both knew that this was just the beginning.